Hello, everyone, and thank you so much for 100 subscribers. I am so glad to finally show you what I've been working on since early October. Be warned, there will be both similarities and differences between this and the original Railway Series universe. Anyways, without further ado, here is part 1 of my classic series timeline. 1864. The slate market was going up, and local businessmen wanted to get in on the action. There was a slate vein discovered near the Skarloey Lake back in the 1830s, and it really came to use when the market became more profitable due to the newly expanding town of Crobin's Gate. And so, in January of 1864, the Skarloey Company, named after the lake, was opened, with 2 new engines named Skarloey and Rheneas on the way. The first engine, Skarloey, will be built at the Fletcher Jennings workshop at Whitehaven in September and would arrive at the Skarloey Railway later that month as their number 1. It would also be around this time the Sodor and Mainland Railway would open, with mainland engines arriving for the standard gauge lines. 2 years later, the other engine ordered, named Rheneas, had finished construction and had arrived at the Skarloey Railway as their number 2, who could help with both the slate traffic and also the new passenger service open, and the railway would get new coaches for it. It was also around this time another railway company had made a deal with the Skarloey Railway to create another railway company that extended beyond Skarloey Station. This company's railway was called the Mid-Sodor Railway, and the company shared this name. The roughly 17-year-old manager, who I have decided to name Joseph Payne I, had ordered his first engine and loaned another. In 1867, the first engine arrived, which was a small England class named Duke after the Duke of Sodor. The loaned engine was also small England, who was named Bertram. The second engine was another Fletcher Jennings engine resembling Rheneas, named Smudger, who likely arrived with a cab, unlike Rheneas. This would also be around the time Skarloey would gain his trailing wheels to cure his bucking and bouncing, which did work very well, and he now follows the railway's regulations to run the newly opened passenger run. It would also be around this time a standard gauge branch line and an extension of the Skarloey Railway would go neck and neck with each other on the far east of Sodor, which was called the Bluebell Railway. In 1878, another engine was loaned from Falcon Works, but with no name. Spoilers for later in the timeline, but he'll be the ghost engine in Season 5 and thus looks like Skarloey since he really uses his prop, but I think his real-life basis can be something from the Chorus Railway. So I'll just use number 1 with the face of Proteus as a visual, and I'll just call him Proteus to make it easier for me. Around 1880 or so, likely 1881, Topham Hatt I would be born in the town of Wellsworth on Sodor. In 1882, Proteus would be rebuilt with trailing wheels, going from an 040 to an 042. It would also be between here and 1899 that manager Payne would finally have enough of Smudger and would take away his wheels and turn him into a steam generator. In 1889, manager Payne would die, and his son would take over as manager of the Mid-Sodor. Although we don't know the name of this manager, I'm going to call him Manager Payne II. And he is the manager we see in Bulldog at 25 years old. And yes, he was born in 1875 and was 14 years old when he became manager of an entire railway. Let's just ignore that, okay? Good. Moving on, this would also be around the time Proteus would cross the old Iron Bridge during a late-night run. Due to the Mid-Sodor's poorly maintained track work following the death of manager Payne I, the rails would give way beneath him. Proteus plunged into the river below, likely perishing with his crew either from the impact or the flooding cab. And we finally come to the build date of a significant main character, that being Edward, who was built as one of the first of the NER Class Rs in 1899. Also built this year are the Scottish twins, Donald and Douglas, as some of the first of the Caledonian Railway A12s. You can tell they're A12s because of the cabs. In 1900, the Mid-Sodor, having ordered an 042 from Falcon Works about a year prior, had finally gotten their third official engine, named Falcon after the works. And we finally come to our first actual episode, Bulldog. Falcon, being arrogant and thinking Duke is a fusspot, doesn't pay attention while double-heading a train with Duke and ends up nearly falling off a cliff. Luckily, Duke saved Falcon, and all was now well between the two. In 1904, Skarloey and Rheneas would finally gain their cabs and would have their modern liveries. Skarloey still keeping his red with white lining, and Rheneas orange with black lining. 1906 would be the build date of everyone's favorite Green Goblin, Percy. Percy would be built at the Powsland and Mason as their number 6 for shunting at Swansea Docks. Around 1907, Topham Hatt would marry his modern wife, who I'm gonna call Jane Brown after her Railway Series counterpart, who I did make the sister of the controller of the Skarloey Railway at the time, Sir Handel Brown. I thought it would be funny. After having been drawn up the year prior, the very first Lancashire and Yorkshire Class 29, a mogul version of the Class 28, was built in 1913. This experiment was built to fix the 28's tendency to bounce at high speeds, which did not work at all. This engine would be named James, and his life at the LNYR did not last long before he went to Sodor to work at the Tidmouth, Knapford, and Ellsbridge Light Railway, explaining why he was seen at Knapford before being added to the North Western Railway beforehand, and painted a special red livery as a way to show him he now has a new life. This would also be the year the Fat Controller's son would be born, likely named Charles Hatt, like in the Railway series. In 1914, a GER C-53 class tram engine numbered 127 and named Toby would be built for the Wisbech and Upwell Tramway and the ports of Great Yarmouth and Ipswich. And 1 year later, in 1915, the main line of the North Western Railway would finally be open for service, with Topham Hatt as the controller, and would inherit a baronetcy for his service and would gain the title Sir, making his full name Sir Topham Hatt. Due to his stout nature and being the controller of the railway, he would be nicknamed the Fat Controller. How flattering! It was also around this time that Toby would be moved from Ipswich to a smaller railway at the north of the island, where he would stay until withdrawal. Around 1916 or so, after 10 of the LB and SCR's E2 class tank engines were built, there was a demand at the Northwestern Railway during the Great War, specifically at where was once the Tidmouth, Knapford, and Ellsbridge Light Railway, for smaller tank engines that could travel a ways. Thus, a batch of these engines were ordered. The original designer of the E2s, LB Ellington, made a design of these smaller E2s, nicknamed the Baby E2 class, in a short amount of time, resulting in a lot of differences, notably with splashers and an inconsistent running board, with a dip at the front and a flat on the back. One of these engines would be named Thomas, who would get pilot duties at the largest station, Knapford, which was how he was able to survive long after the original engines were scrapped. It would also be around this time an experimental engine based on the discarded design of Sir Nigel Gresley's A1 class, nicknamed the GNR A0, along with other details inspired by a GNR Class C1, would be built. This experimental engine would be named Henry. In 1918, an Andrew Barclay & Co. engine named Duncan would be built for the Coltonist Iron Company in Newmain, Scotland, and would wear a blue livery matching the other engines working for the company. This is where he would develop his less than stellar attitude.
I'm a plain speaking engine and I believe in plain speaking. Speak up. I know my way about. I don't need smelly diesels to tell me what to do.
In 1921, after the war had ended, the Roaring Twenties began and the Mid-Sodor Railway had been doing well enough to purchase a new engine and purchase its loaned engines like Bertram. The new engine, built by Kerr Stewart & Co., would be named Stewart after the company and became the Mid-Sodor's number 4. This would also be around the time Thomas and Edward would be bought by the NWR, making the NWR's numbers 1 and 2. Right after this is the events of You Can't Win, where we see Thomas with his modern livery and number. Sometime after that, the Fat Controller would buy Henry as the NWR's number 3, who proved to be not the most efficient engine to ever exist. In 1923, the Big Grouping Act occurred, which had most railways in the UK transformed into 4 different railways: the Great Western Railway, the London and North Eastern Railway, the London Midland and Scottish Railway, and the Southern Railway. The North Western would mostly be its own thing, but it's not big enough to be one of the 4, or 5 in this case. Also this year, what is possibly the most famous locomotive in the world would be built: LNER number 4472, the Flying Scotsman. "16 years later, in 1939, a lot would happen. First off, an LNER A3 with the original A1 dome would be built, and would be named Gordon, and he would go to Sodor not long after as their permanent express engine, making him the NWR's number 4. A 24-year-old Charles Hatt would marry 21-year-old Amanda Crory, making her Lady Amanda Hatt. Now for the darker stuff. On September 1st, 1939, Nazi Germany would invade Poland, officially starting World War II. And this will make a turning point on this timeline. On a much lighter note, the oldest diesel in the series, Rusty, would be built by Ruston and Hornsby for the Gees Quarries in Hartshill, Wales in 1940. Although starting in September 1940, the Barrow Blitz would primarily take place on April and May of 1941, which involved German bombers called the Luftwaffes bombing the town of Barrow-in-Furness, including the station where it had been rebuilt without a roof even to this day. Now, because the line ended at Meron in Season 1, which likely took place in the 40s, when we know the main line went further, yeah, we can assume that stations like Vickerstown or Kildane would have the same fate as Barrow, and Sodor would have likely suffered hard during this time, which would explain both the short line and the small amount of people along with how short the express is. I mean, seriously, it's like 3 coaches. It would also be this year Charles and Amanda Hatt would have their first child, Stephen Hatt, and about 2 years later, they would have their second child, Bridget Hatt. On May 8, 1945, Germany had surrendered, marking the end of World War II in Europe, leaving the UK in quite a state. As during the war, road lights were turned off for blackouts to hide away from enemy aircraft, we can assume most of the first episodes in the first season would take place after World War II. This is a speculated date, but on September 12, 1945, an engine crew consisting of a driver named Charlie Sand and a fireman named Sidney Heaver would finally put the 46-year-old Edward back into service and pulled a short passenger train for the first time since the Great Depression.